Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, and it's a bit of a slow day, as you'd expect, going into the first day of the All-Star break. So we're going to do a couple of different segments in mind. So the first segment this time, we're going to be talking about if Jokic and Luka were teammates. There was a little bit of a story going on about All-Star game if they were if they had a chance of teaming up. So we're going to look into that. We are also going to be looking in the second segment. We are going to be talking about more into the Nets' new head coach situation and who exactly they're bringing in as the new head coach since they recently fired Jack Vaughn. And in the third segment, we are going to be talking about JJ Redick and how he had some words about Doc Rivers on his via First Take. And we're going to just deep dive into what he said and what that could mean for the Bucks going into the future. We also have our fourth segment, as always, so stay in tune for that. Before we begin with the fourth segment, however, I'd like to remind everybody, as always, to please remember to tip and to donate. To get your comments recognized, use the link that is in the description below or the link that is displayed in the ticker below every single show segment. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. Once again, the link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead into our first segment, which is going to be talking about if Luka and Jokic were to team up. So this was a lot of talk around All-Star Weekend, and it's always a talk around All-Star Weekend because of the clips that a lot of fans and a lot of people end up seeing that end up having Luka and Jokic in them. They always seem to know how to have a good time. They always seem to know how to share laughs with each other. There's never a dull moment with those two. They even, in the middle of the game, they shared a moment where they just did nothing but pass the ball to each other for like 5 straight times. And they never dribbled the ball. They just kept passing to each other in the All-Star game. So obviously they love having fun. They have a lot in common as well. They're both foreign players representing their home country. They make the game look easy all the time with all the triple doubles that they get. They're constantly in the MVP conversations. They always seem to be better than the rest of these players that come into the league. And again, they make it look effortless. And their play styles, while they are a little bit different in the sense that Jokic posts up while Luka is a face-up guard, they both play at their own pace, and they both made it a trend to be able to play at their own pace. A lot of teams they try to adjust to the fast pacing the league usually has now, but not Luka and Jokic. They score at their own pace, and they do it really well. So because of this, a lot of and with the amount of fun that they both have with each other on the court, it's like they're destined to become teammates at one point. And a lot of fans speculate this, and so they asked Jokic how they would feel if Doncic were to be his teammate, or if that's a possibility in the future. And he said, quote, "I don't know. It's possible. I don't want to leave Denver. I like it there, and it's a great organization, but if Luka gets pissed off in Dallas, he can come." So obviously he's giving the option to Luka on whether or not he want to team up. So Jokic is staying put, and it doesn't really seem like he's going to move from Denver. And I mean, why would he move from Denver? There's no real reason for Jokic to move on from Denver, given how Denver just recently won a championship with him. And their roster isn't bad whatsoever. They already have a competent point guard with Jamal Murray. They have great role players with KCP. And they also have a competent scorer with Aaron Gordon to draw attention off of Jokic if a double team comes. They use Aaron Gordon really well with this offense. And in the beginning, when they first traded him, Aaron Gordon said, "I've never gotten so many good looks at the basket." Like, those were the easiest baskets he was getting. And obviously, if it would be very difficult for the Mavs for the Denver Nuggets to acquire Luka Doncic via trade. Like, the only scenario where they could even end up teaming up is if Luka gets mad at the Mavs organization, because the Mavs, they aren't going to give up Luka. They aren't going to give up Luka, and I don't think any organization in their right mind would give up Luka if they have him under contract. And because so far Luka seems to be happy in the situation that he's in with the Mavs. You could say it's the money, you could say it's the teammates, you could just say it's that he's an overall nice guy, but it seems like he is happy with Dallas. And I feel like if you were to start a trade between Denver and Dallas, if you're Denver, you'd have to give up a pretty sizable load. You'd either have to give up Jokic for him, or you'd have to give up Jamal and a bunch of other pieces that are either on the roster already or could be on the roster in the future. So I don't know exactly how many draft picks they have and what draft picks are valuable, but I do know that Luka Doncic, like, the Mavericks aren't going to give up Luka that easily, unless he's unhappy. Granted, he could force his way out of the team via trade, similar to what James Harden did the past few years, where he was in Houston. He forced his way out via trade by not necessarily taking practice that seriously with them. He forced his way out of Brooklyn by not taking it seriously again, and then he was able to force his way out of Philly by not taking it seriously. So, I mean, obviously, there's more nuance to those trade stories, but again, he could force his way out. I don't think that's necessarily in his character to force his way out. I don't think that's something that Luka would do, but it's still a possibility if the Mavs were to engage in trade talks. But again, don't think that's going to happen because the Mavs are attached with Luka. Why wouldn't they be attached with Luka? So, and not only that, it doesn't really... The Mavs organization, they don't really get a lot of their players angry. The Mavs are a great organization. Mark Cuban is a great owner, and they treat their players right. And so far, they've gotten Kyrie to actually participate in some of their games when he's not injured. Obviously, if you're injured, I don't really expect you to be playing a lot of games, and I don't really expect you to show up in a lot of these games because you're injured. And he was legitimately injured, so it makes sense how he missed a couple of games. But they treat their players with respect, and it doesn't look like Kyrie is aggravated with the organization. It doesn't look like he's upset. We haven't heard any word that Kyrie is upset, and if he is, I'm pretty sure he'd let us know, given how he's let us know whether or not he's upset several times before. And more so on if they could trade him, on if they were to trade him. Luka is a fan favorite, and the same with Kyrie, and they get along well. So I don't necessarily think that Dallas is going to be looking to trade Luka anytime soon. And Dallas's record is 32-23 right now. So again, it's not like the Mavs are a bad team, but it's not like the Mavs are a bad team, but with how, if Luka is unhappy, constantly not being a bad team, but constantly falling short, then there's a possibility that we could see him going to Denver. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it whatsoever, because if I have such a good relationship with Jokic and he's such a great player, then it's like the sky's the limit for that duo. They would be the next Kobe and Shaq. They would be the 1-2 punch that the league desperately needs. Not desperately needs, actually. We don't really need that anymore, but it would definitely bring a lot more attention to Denver. And obviously, I'm not to downplay entirely on Jamal Murray, because Jamal Murray is a very important piece to that team. And if they're able to keep him and at the same time get Luka, that team would be a serious problem. And Luka's always he's always sort of needed help on his roster, and he doesn't really get that much help in a lot of these games, given how I understand, I gave Kyrie the benefit of the doubt for missing a bunch of these games, but still, I always say your best ability is your availability, and he's only played 33 of the 55 games this season. So Kyrie, like, again, like, he hasn't played so much, as much as the rest of the team, and I gave him the benefit of the injury because of the, I gave him the benefit of the doubt because of the injury, but I can't always keep giving Kyrie the benefit of the doubt due to injuries. In fact, he doesn't really deserve it at this point, because so far, since leaving Cleveland, Kyrie has not been able to have a consistently healthy season. As in, he's always sat games out in every single season. And ludicrous amounts of games he's sat out. So, just to give a little bit of a timeline on Kyrie Irving and him sitting out. Ever since he left Cleveland and won the championship in 2016, he was great in 2017 with LeBron in that other series. But with the other teams that he's played with, he's been relatively injury prone, and he hasn't really been healthy, particularly in the postseason. Now, as Kyrie's postseason career is incredibly meh without LeBron. You take out the championship that he won with Cleveland, and he hasn't done much with his playoff career. Now, obviously, making the finals 3 times in a row is impressive, but he did that with LeBron. So, what did he do after LeBron? Well, he went to the Boston Celtics in 2019. Well, no, actually, 2018, pardon me. 2017-2018 season is when he left. And he was great. He was great on Cleveland for the 2016-17 season. And then once he got into the playoffs, he ended up getting injured, and he couldn't play the entirety of the 2018 playoffs. But it was fine for Boston. Boston was able to make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they lost to LeBron, who was playing the best basketball that I've ever seen from any player in the playoffs. So it was almost as if, if the Boston Celtics had Kyrie, then they would make that final step and they would make it far. So the next year, 2019, comes around. Kyrie plays again for the Celtics, and this is where a lot of the tension between him and the Celtics organization starts to rise. Now, Kyrie becomes unhappy. It's visibly known that he's unhappy because he wants to be... The story behind it is that he wanted to be the man, but it seemed that the Celtics organization was leaning more towards Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and their young stars. So obviously there was a lot of chemistry issue between that team. Those guys were more focused on the team, but Kyrie was more focused on like himself. It seemed like. I'm not going to throw in a bunch of stories out there, but that's what it seemed like. And in the 2019 series with Boston, the team ended up going the team didn't end up going as far as they thought they would in 2019. And they ended up going shorter in the playoffs with him than they did without him. They ended up losing earlier in the second round. And Kyrie had a really bad series. He had one game where he shot 8 for 22. He said, that's not going to happen again. And then he goes into the next game and he goes 7 for 22. And obviously, they lose the series in 6 games. And this was where it didn't look like Kyrie's future with Boston was all that certain. And it looked like Boston was he was going to move on from Boston. And he ended up doing that. And he ended up signing with the Brooklyn Nets after the Boston Celtics ended up losing in the second round, with Kevin Durant making a super team, a dynamic duo, if you will, in Brooklyn. But since KD technically doesn't play in that year for Brooklyn because he recently got injured with an Achilles injury and was sidelined for 2020, Kyrie also decided not to play that many games in the season, and he didn't even play half the games. Didn't go into the bubble for the Nets whatsoever, as the Nets got swept in the bubble. So not really, that year was sort of like chopped off for the Nets because they weren't at full strength and they knew they weren't going to be at full strength. So they just waited until 2021. And it made sense at the time for Kyrie Irving because it's like, why would Kyrie play a bunch of these games when they didn't really matter? Like, we're just risking him getting injured as well. But 2021 was supposed to be the official year of the Nets finally doing something. They got to the second round where Kyrie Irving then gets injured after the second game of the second round. You notice a trend here. If he's not doing well in the playoffs, he's either injured or he's just playing bad. Like, it's one or the other. He's either just not playing or he's just playing bad. And because of this, the Nets ended up losing in 7 games in the second round. And the Boston Celtics ended up going... Actually, no, they did not end up going farther in this year because they beat the Celtics, pardon me. But the year before that, the Celtics did end up going farther than Kyrie did. And going into next season, there were more rules put in place for COVID-19 in certain states, New York being the one to get punished more than all of them. And that's the city that didn't allow a lot of people to work if they didn't take their vaccine. Kyrie Irving, being one of the players that didn't take the vaccine, then decided to, it caused him not to play in the rest of the season because since he didn't take the vaccine, he wasn't legally allowed to play for the Brooklyn Nets. And this caused a lot of chemistry problems with the team. Harden wasn't dealing with these chemistry problems and requested a trade, therefore turning the Brooklyn Nets back from a super team to a dynamic duo. I skipped that part a little bit just because we're not really focused on Harden all that much. And obviously, shorthanded for the entire season, if the Nets were to do anything in the postseason, it would take a miracle. But they ended up making it. They ended up making it surprisingly, and Kyrie and KD ended up playing the games that they needed in the final stretch of the season to make it to the playoffs. And their postseason was incredibly short-lived. Kyrie only had one good game, and that good game was Game 1. After that, he played absolutely terrible and got swept to the Boston Celtics. So, obviously, he's been nothing but a disappointment in the postseason, and his seasons have ended in nothing but disappointment. So, with this season ending in another disappointment, he decides to request a trade again, this time mid-season, and go to the Mavs. And this would prove to be a bad move on him because he would end up missing the playoffs with the Dallas Mavericks and with Luka Doncic. The Mavs ended up giving up a lot of pieces trying to trade for Kyrie Irving. So they didn't really have much on the defense to be able to make their offense effective. Because they were able to score easily on teams with Kyrie and Luka, teams were able to score easily on them. So now, with all of this in mind, why did I bring up Kyrie's history? I bring this up because if there was any opportunity for Luka to play with Nikola Jokic, it would probably be now. Kyrie Irving can be the driving force to blow up any organization. He can single-handedly end off any super team he wants. I have absolutely no doubts in his mind. If Kyrie wanted to just push the button and be like, I'm angry, I want to get traded, I want to get out of here, he will do it. He will do it. And it could happen anytime. That's the thing. You have no idea when it's going to happen with Kyrie. It's incredibly unpredictable. So with that unpredictability in mind, if Luka gets upset at Kyrie enough and Kyrie just acts out for whatever reason, it could be the driving force to send Luka away. I'm sure if they were put in a scenario, the Mavs would choose Luka over Kyrie. But what if they didn't? What if Kyrie put the Mavs in a situation that would force them to give up Luka? I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but Kyrie, he can do whatever he sets his mind to with these teams. He could end off any sort of chance. Because if he leaves, then the Mavs, they don't really have, I don't see them as a contender anymore. Because Luka, while he's fantastic and he's a great player, it's really difficult to carry a team by yourself going into the playoffs with isolation alone. So, again, when he made his deep playoff run, he had Jalen Brunson. And while he was also an ISO player, he was a really good ISO player, and he was able to produce. And that's sort of what he needs. He needs players to produce. And losing Kyrie Irving, you lose a player to produce, and you just can't do that. And I feel like that would be the breaking point. If there would be any breaking point with Luka and the Mavs, that would be a breaking point, and I think Kyrie would be the main catalyst for that breaking point. But with that, we are out of time for the first segment, so we are going to go into the second segment where I talk about the new head coach that the Brooklyn Nets decided to bring along. whether I like the move, whether I don't like the move. Obviously, since I'm a Nets fan, I'm going to have a lot more insight on this move than a lot more people do. And I'm going to keep my bias aside, as always, but I can't make no guarantees. But stay in tune for the second segment as I talk about the new head coach. So I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Sticking out on your shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Sorry for that longer than usual break. Had to go use the bathroom. So, with that out of the way, we are going to talk about Brooklyn Nets and their new head coach. And this is going to be one of those topics where I am not going to be in a relatively happy mood, but I will talk about it nonetheless, and I will talk about it without having much bias, hopefully. But before I begin with this segment, I'd like to remind everybody, as always, please remember to tip and to donate to get your comments recognized. The link is in the description. It is also displayed in the ticker below every single show segment. The link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Once again, the link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And let's go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off and talk about this new head coach. So, the new head coach that the Nets decide to bring along is Kevin Ollie, after the Knicks recently decided to fire Jack Vaughn as their last head coach, who they, for some reason, recently signed for an extension, only to fire him afterwards. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So they obviously had to replace for the coach that they ended up firing. So they ended up getting interim coach Kevin Ollie for the job. And just like Vaughn, his coaching experience isn't really that strong. Ollie was the head coach for the Yukon Huskies around the time the Huskies left the Big East and joined the AAC in 2012. And now the Huskies, they were, during the time span of during his tenure as a coach, they were relatively well. In his first year, they ended 20-10. In the second year, they were 32-8. Then in 2014, 2015, they were 20-15. 2016, they were 25-11. 2016, 2017, they were 16-17. 2017 and 2018, they were 14-18, where he was then eventually fired from the organization in 2018. He did lead the Huskies to their fourth national title in 2014, however, which was ultimately their best season, going 32-8. So then he took a break from coaching and coached for Overtime Elite from 2021 to 2023. So again, not the experience that I would personally want from a head coach going into mid-season at all. Like, what's worse is that we've already seen what could happen to a team if they were to replace their head coach mid-season. I mean, obviously, like, we did see we also saw Jack Vaughn completely turn the Brooklyn Nets around from losing with Steve Nash to going on their best win streak in franchise history. But the argument could be made that it was just the fact that he was coaching Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Those two are some of the best isolation players that the league has ever seen. And therefore, there wasn't really much that needed to be done other than to make sure that the players were standing in the right spots and Kyrie and Kevin Durant had enough space to operate and the lineups were catered to their play style, if you would. And when you have players like that, and it just makes the job so much easier, because I'm just adjusting the lights real quick, don't mind me, because it makes your job easier because there's not really much that you need to do as a coach. The players end up doing the job for you. Like, they're so good that they can provide on the offensive side of the ball, so that way you don't have to worry about drawing up plays and trying to confuse the defense, which is something that Golden State tends to do. Like, Golden State is one of the few teams that doesn't necessarily rely on isolation. They do, don't get me wrong, they do. But a lot of their plays are derived from off-ball screens, on-ball screens, and a combination of passes to get the defense moving. And with that in mind, it takes great chemistry and great coaching in order to pull off that kind of offense and that kind of ball movement to perfection. Like, so that's sort of the difference between, like, having a good coach and having, like, a coach that sort of does nothing and it allows their players to sort of operate more into their own system rather than into the system of an offense that he has set. That's sort of the difference between Vaughn's coaching experience at first starting with Brooklyn compared to what it's ended with Brooklyn, to where, okay, now he sort of doesn't really have that many competent players, and some of these players don't even want to play all that many games. Ben Simmons. So having that, with that in mind, was it fair to fire Vaughn mid-season? I personally don't think so. I personally think that the Nets should have kept Vaughn for the remainder of the season, and if they were going to move on from him, they should have done that after the season, because right now the team is out of the play-in conversation. They could make a run if they end up doing well, who knows? And they could make a spot in the playoffs if they win the play-in games. But then again, it's like replacing your coach mid-season is not going to help the team. The team is already facing a bunch of head coaching changes because a lot of these players recently were acquired via trade. Therefore, they were playing under a completely different head coach. And some of the old players, like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, they all came from Phoenix in the Kevin Durant trade. And now they're expected to go from Kevin Durant, from being coached by Vaughn from being coached by the head coach on Phoenix, which at the time I believe was Monty, to then being coached by Vaughn for a few months, to now being coached by a completely new coach that doesn't have much experience, Kevin Ollie. So with that in mind, it's a lot of coaching changes. It's 3 coaches in the span of like about a year. And with that in mind, I'm not really sure that that's a good step in the right direction. The Bucks have already changed their head coach mid-season, and we've seen the results of that. So far, they've been 3-7, and they've not been relatively good in the regular season. Therefore, with that in mind, the Nets are doing the exact same thing, and it doesn't make sense. And they're stuck between a rock and a hard place right now because I feel like the Nets should tank, honestly. Like, they should just completely, like, they should start over, get ready for the next season. This season is lost. Like, there's no point. And I just don't understand why they decide to just bring a completely new head coach into the mix of already the amount of problems that the Nets have. Because Vaughn was expected to do a lot for this team. Like, he already had a lineup set up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie. Then they request a trade. So now his lineups have to be different. And now he needs to implement Cam Thomas into the lineup. And Cam Thomas is a terrible defender. He's one of the worst defenders I've seen. There are times where he literally straight up just leaves his assignment to go double team for no reason. You can't do that in an era of spacing. So he's a bad defender, and Vaughn has to learn how to manage that with the lineups to be able to cater to his play style because Cam Thomas doesn't really like passing the ball. He is a scorer. He's really good at it. Don't get me wrong. He is really good at it. But he doesn't necessarily pass the ball. And that's sort of what the team lacks. They lack a true playmaker. They have Dennis Schroeder. But Dennis Schroeder, like, seriously, he's a bench player. He's not going to lead us anywhere. And we need a very good starting point guard to lead the Brooklyn Nets somewhere. And it's just this new coaching change. It doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't, because it's a whole new setup that they now have to change. And what if this coach has a completely different play style than Vaughn, and now these players have to learn something completely new on the fly? And it's just not something that I think, it's not a sustainable position. I don't agree with this whatsoever. And they should have just stayed. They should have stayed with Vaughn for the final year, and they could have just fired him after the season. Like, again, if this season was a lost cause like it already was, I feel like there was no need to just make it even more lost with a completely different head coach. It's really bad. And with that, I think with this coaching change, the Nets, they might be done. I think they might be completely done for the rest of the season. And there's really, there's just nothing that the Nets could do now. And looking at this article, they've fallen out of top 10, and they've made the change, over the All-Star break. I understand why this firing completely, I understand why this happened. They recently lost to the Boston Celtics by 50-plus points. They only scored 86, while the Boston Celtics ended up scoring 138 or something like that. And obviously, that's a really terrible loss, so it makes sense how he got fired directly after that. But again, the season was lost anyway, so it was just a waste of time. Again, I keep saying that the season is lost, but again, it's just it was lost. There was really nothing else that there was nothing else that they really could have done. And Kevin Ollie, why would you rather have a coach that has college experience as opposed to a coach that has NBA experience already in Vaughn? I mean, experience triumphs over practically everything in this light is falling. Whoops. Experience triumphs over practically everything in this league, and you sort of need that experience in order to remain an effective basketball player, an effective coach. And obviously, like, sometimes experience is like it could be the downfall of some teams, like the San Antonio Spurs with Greg Popovich, all the experience he has in winning championships. And so far, this team with the Spurs is looking nowhere near championship contending. But again, like, I mean, he won an NCAA title, cool, but UConn is known for getting a lot of great athletes, and they're known for winning NCAA titles. They literally just won a men's title last year in the NCAA tournament. So it doesn't really surprise me that he ended up winning with the Huskies at one point in his career. It's obviously really difficult. Not going to downplay that, but again, it's the same trend of being aided by a lot of great players and a lot of great prospects. That's the same thing that Vaughn had. That's the same thing that Nash had. Nash just couldn't handle coaching Kyrie. And to be fair, nobody can really handle coaching Kyrie. It's really difficult to coach him. So he had to be let go. He wasn't a relatively good head coach because, again, these players, they were ISO heavy. So there was nothing that really needed to be coached there when you're in ISO heavy positions. And with that being said, there's barely any room for error. It's usually the players that mess up. And while it's not relatively fair to fire the coach when the players do mess up, the coach is responsible for running these plays. And if what you usually run isn't working, then the coach needs to be there to make the adjustments so that way their offense can work and their offense can continue to score. That's sort of like the basis of having a coach, and that's the main problem with ISO-heavy lineups. Because once the ISO doesn't work and once teams figure out how to defend it, or once they're having a bad game, there's nothing that they can do. And we saw this trend in 2022, I believe, when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant played arguably the worst game 2 I've ever seen in my life. They went like 1 for 18 from the field in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. They missed every single shot, but for some reason, Steve Nash never called timeouts while they were missing shots and while the Boston Celtics were going on a run. The Brooklyn Nets were up by about like 20 points at one point, and the lead slowly ended up going away because Kyrie and Kevin Durant were taking way more shots than the rest of the team because of how ISO heavy they are, and they were missing. Because they were missing, the Boston Celtics were able to continue to score because of the lack of defense, and the Brooklyn Nets ended up losing that game. And so having those ISO-heavy lineups and having a coach that doesn't make those adjustments ends up being the downfall of some of these teams. But just a little bit that I wanted to talk about with this new coach. Again, not really much that could be said about him because there's not much experience. And unlike with Doc Rivers, where there's a lot of things to say about Doc. And speaking of Doc, we're out of time with this first segment, so I'm going to go into the third segment, where I talk about JJ Redick having a few things to say about Doc Rivers and his coaching experience. So I will be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about JJ Redick calling out Doc Rivers after via First Take and via Awful and via First Take. So basically, I'm just going to pull up JJ Redick's stats right here just to give you guys a little bit of a history around JJ Redick and why he's been saying a lot of these things, why he's allowed to say these things about Doc. So he was a role player, but he was a very, very good sixth man of the year. He was a very good sixth man of the year candidate and was a very good sixth man for a lot of the teams that he played with. Now, while he was a sixth man, he did end up starting in a lot of his games around 2013, 2014 when he was playing for the Clippers. Now, he spent his time in Orlando where he developed his game into being known as a very lethal three-point shooter. He shot 41% from three in his career and 39% in Orlando. So with that in mind, he was a very valuable asset going into the NBA, especially around this time where the era of the three-point shot was starting to reach its peak. And around 2012, 2013, he was traded to Milwaukee for a few games, and then he was later sent to the Clippers, where he really took his stride and became one of the most lethal shooters in the NBA. And he had some of his best seasons were as a Clipper, and he ended up shooting 40% in just about every single season except for one with the LA Clippers from the three. And his best season with the Clippers was when he averaged 16 points on 48% from the field, 47% from three, and 88% from the free throw line. So obviously he was a very good asset for the Clippers, and he was on the same team that Doc Rivers was coaching because Doc Rivers, as I said previously on podcast, he started coaching the Clippers after he coached Boston. And with that in mind, we all know the history around the Clippers and blowing leads and losing in a bunch of series where they should have won, especially in the second round where they ended up blowing a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets. JJ Redick did play his part. He wasn't at fault for losing any of these games, but again, he was part of a very infamous roster that was very disappointing in the postseason. And with that in mind, with how the Bucks are performing right now, with Doc Rivers being 3-7 and whatnot, JJ Redick had some things to say about Doc Rivers and the situation. So he said, quote, "I've seen the trend for years. The trend is always making excuses. Doc, we get it. Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard. It's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus. There's never accountability with that guy." End quote. So obviously not a lot of positive words coming from JJ Redick towards Doc Rivers. So obviously, having one of your former players say this about you is not good for your resume. And I said it previously, how on a previous podcast, how I believe that Doc Rivers was just throwing his team under the bus, the same way that he threw Ben Simmons under the bus. And I'm not entirely crazy for saying that and accusing him of that, because now JJ Redick is out here saying the exact same thing about how Doc Rivers just throws people under the bus. Obviously, this was a reference to how Doc Rivers was saying that some players on the team didn't know the play. And this was in response to his post-game comments. So I'm just going to pull up Doc Rivers' post-game comments right now. Because he said this in the most recent loss about his team. Some teams were in a completely different state of mind. And if I just pull out the right quote with the Bucks, because they lost in shocking fashion to the Memphis Grizzlies, which they shouldn't have lost. And because, I remember the quote. He said that we had some players in Cabo or something like that. And obviously this was a shot at some of the players and their lack of attention. And while I understand, like, you can't entirely control your team and what plays they remember, you're also sort of like in that power to make them remember the plays. Like, you're the one that hosts the meetings, and if you know that the team struggle remembering a play, maybe, I don't know, review the play in the film room for a few times, run the play a few times. Like, apparently it's a very common trend with Doc Rivers to throw a bunch of players under the bus. And I mentioned that he's done it with Ben Simmons, so I'll go ahead and touch up on that. So previously, when he was the coach for the Sixers, Ben Simmons was their starting point guard for the time. The Sixers were the number 1 seed, and obviously they were one of the favorites to win the entire thing. And this was in 2021. So they go into the second round, they face the Hawks, and Ben Simmons, he just plays absolutely horrible. He plays so scared, and it's as if he doesn't want to participate at all in the offense. And he ends up passing up a wide-open dunk over Trae Young. Like, it took me a while to say that because I'm still, like, stunned at the fact that he really passed up an open dunk on Trae Young, a guy that's 6'2", 6'1", compared to his height being 6'10", and he passed it up. So obviously, a lot of the players weren't happy with this, Joel Embiid in particular, and Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers throw him under the bus immediately, and this angers Ben Simmons, causing him to not want to play for the Sixers anymore. I don't blame him, but at the same time, like, that's really weak. You should just play, because why don't you just go out there and prove to everyone that you are better than what they say. That's what if I had Ben Simmons' skills, that's what I would do. And he gets traded, so now that James Harden is on the Sixers, there's like barely any excuse. Joel Embiid also just won the MVP. There's no excuse. So the first year, this was when Joel Embiid was a runner-up to the MVP. They ended up losing with Harden. So obviously, like, Harden played really bad, and Doc Rivers, I mean, he didn't really do much to help the team. But at the same time, James Harden did play really bad. Then they went into the next season with Joel Embiid winning the MVP and playing the Boston Celtics, where they blew a 3-2 lead. So obviously, that's when they decided to cut the strings with Doc Rivers and fired him, because he just keeps blowing leads. This is constant with him, and he doesn't do anything to improve the team. He just throws them under the bus. I understand that the players have to make shots, but as a coach, you can't say that about your players on live TV. You can't say that. Like, you have to own up to the fact that there could have been things that maybe you could have done better, and the fact that you just say that the team needs we just need to work harder, and like we need to practice more, stuff like that. Like, you don't throw them completely under the bus. That's just not cool, in my personal opinion. But with that, we are out of time for the third segment, so tune in for the fourth segment, where we take a look at the NBA Power Rankings. Now, despite the fact that there haven't been any games that went down, the Power Rankings were still released, apparently, yesterday, and we didn't get to look at them yesterday, so we're going to look at them today, right after this short break. And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we're going to take a quick look at the power rankings for this week, because I am a little bit curious, given how there weren't games over the weekend, so it's going to be games based off of like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And again, like really curious about the results for some of these games. I predict that the Milwaukee Bucks are going to be like in the 10th spot after their recent loss to Memphis. They are not going to move up, they're going to move down. The Timberwolves, they will move up to the top 3, in my opinion. I think that their wins over the Blazers and their blowout wins against the Clippers as well, and against which other team did they play? I'm just looking at the schedule right now. So they blew out the Clippers. I believe it was the Bucks that they blew out after the Clippers. I'm just making sure. But they play the Bucks. Yes, it was the Bucks that they blew out before blowing out the Clippers. So I definitely believe that they will go up in the rankings. OKC is going to stay roughly the same. I don't see them moving up. Same with Boston, same with the Clippers. I think they're going to stay relatively the same going into these power rankings. But with that out of the way, let's open it up. So yeah, you could see my screen right now as I move this around and explore this page. Go ahead and see what teams are. So the Boston Celtics, they're the thumbnail, so I'm assuming that they're going to stay in the exact same spot as they always have been, in the one spot. So let's just see. Yep, 43-12 is their record. They obviously hold the one spot because they've been on a roll. They beat my Brooklyn Nets twice, one of them in a blowout win at home, 136-86. Obviously, really bad performance by them. They haven't lost a game since losing to the Lakers in the beginning of the month. So with that, and most of the games that they've won that have been in blowouts, except against the Miami Heat and against my Brooklyn Nets, the first time they matched up. So with that in mind, obviously, I mean, like, this team is just way too good. Look, they rank 5th in field goal percentage in the paint, 60%, and they lead the league in three-point percentage with 47%, which is always, like, again, like, there's pros and cons with that because, while you could be relatively good in the regular season at shooting threes, what if those three, like, you got to make those threes? What if you don't make them in the playoffs? And we've seen that happen to several teams that rely heavy on the three ball, and they end up losing because of the three ball. Like the 2018 Houston Rockets, when they missed 27 straight threes. If they would have made a few of those three-pointers, then they would have ended up winning that game. But both when they've shot the league average or better from three-point range, they're 26-2. And when they haven't, they're 17-10. So obviously they win a lot more when you hit more threes. That makes a lot of sense. The Timberwolves move all the way up from 5 to 2. I'm very surprised with this. Oh, and that reminds me, the Knicks are probably going to move a little bit down on the power rankings, given how they've been losing a couple of games against relatively mediocre teams. I personally don't agree with that because, like, they've been playing injured, and they haven't been at their full strength. So with that in mind, I don't think it's relatively fair to lower them in the power rankings. But that's just me. I'm very surprised. I mean, given how Minnesota recently, like, they won in several blowouts, it makes sense that they move all the way up. The Clippers, they move down to the 3rd spot, which isn't bad. It's not bad at all. I mean, again, like, while I see the Clippers playing well in the regular season, I have to see it in the playoffs, and this is one of those teams that I just can't bring myself to trust. In Cleveland, they moved down from the 3 all the way down to 4, which isn't a big jump because, like, obviously, like, since the Clippers moved down, they have to move down. Makes sense given how they lost to the Sixers without Joel Embiid. But they've still they still have a relatively good record, 18-2, and these numbers are really good for them. So OKC, they move up from 6 to 5. So again, they stay at that mid-tier. I don't think this team is going to do much going into the playoffs. They might be one and done. Wouldn't be surprised, but this team's been playing really good in the regular season. They lost to the Pistons, and again, I can't take a team seriously when they lose to the Pistons. It's not something that I think is the smartest thing to do. The Denver Nuggets, they drop all the way down from 4 to 6. So a little bit surprised that the Nuggets have moved all the way down from such a... But then again, they did lose some really winnable games. They recently lost to the Kings. They also lost to the Bucks. They actually lost to the Kings twice. But they beat the Lakers, which, again, is not really saying much. But losing to the Kings twice and also losing to the Bucks is not really good for the Denver Nuggets. Again, I don't really think this is like something that they need to really worry about because they still have Jokic, they still have Jamal Murray, they still have enough on their roster to make a deep playoff run. So, again, nothing really to worry about. The Mavericks, they stayed the same in the 7th spot in the power rankings. Obviously, having Kyrie Irving on the team is definitely like improves their power rankings. They've been winning a lot more games because of Kyrie and his scoring. So they have the league's biggest differential between their record when they've shot the league average or better from 3. So they're a really lethal team when they get it going 23-5. And when they haven't, obviously, that's when they're taking a lot of shots and missing. Makes sense how they're 9-18 because they don't have defense to fall back on. The Phoenix Suns, they move up from the 9th spot all the way to the 8th, so not a big jump for Phoenix, but again, relatively fair, given how they haven't really made, like, there's not much talk around Phoenix. Like, when they play good, they get talked about, but when they don't, and when it's, like, quiet for a lot of the big three, they don't really get talked about that much. Obviously, Booker and Beal having 2 games where they played literally 5 minutes is not ideal. They ended up winning both of those games, which is cool. They lost to the Warriors, however, which was in a nail-biter with Curry hitting the game winner. But again, like, this team is really good with matchups. They have great scorers. They're going to be a very difficult team in the playoffs when it comes to guarding one-on-one. So this is a team that you have to worry about. The Pelicans move up to the 9th spot. I'm very surprised to see the Pelicans back up here. But makes sense. I mean, the Sixers, they're not going to be in the top 10 anymore. So there is definitely room. So I do see, like, Pelicans are a relatively good team. I think I have them holding the 6th seed right now by the time the season is over. But we'll see what happens. The Knicks take the 10th spot, so the Bucks are completely out of the top 10 in power rankings, and it's only under Doc, is it? I bet you they're 11th though. Yep, they are 11th. So they just move out of the top 10, and no surprises there. Doc Rivers is really, like, he's been really underperforming. I already talked about him in the previous segment, but again, he has not been a good head coach for these guys, and with that in mind, we have someone in the chat real quick, and I just saw the chat, so pardon me. I'm just going to take a quick look at it real quick. Wouldn't OKC getting Luka seem more probable? They have the draft picks plus young players to sell the Mavs that they'll be set with, a rebuild after giving up a cornerstone player like Luka. That's an interesting trade, Sean Hackett. And yes, they do have they do have the assets available to get Luka if they want Luka. But at the same time, like, as of right now, I'm not entirely sure if they would want to have Luka on the team when they already have Shai Gilgeous. Like, I mean, again, like, I could see that happening, but I don't really see 2 dominant ball handlers being the solution to the team as of right now. Like, I have to see how OKC plays, like, in the postseason, and whether or not what Shai can do what he's doing right now in the regular season. That too, Sean. They also don't have cap issues yet, but I don't really I don't really know the relationship between Luka and the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, I have a lot. I know, like, we all know the relationship that he has with Jokic, which, like, again, it is going to be. I already talked about it in the previous segment. I'm not sure if you were there for that, but I don't really see Luka being able to go to the Denver Nuggets via a trade, given how they would have to give up a lot of pieces, and I just don't see the Denver Nuggets doing that with the relationship that they have with Jamal Murray. I mean, he was injured at one point, and even when he was injured, they weren't giving him up. They were still they still had hope for him, and I understand. I understand your side completely about how OKC definitely has, like, they have the picks, they have the young players that they're able to sell to that team if they were to start a trade. However, I don't really think that package with all of those young players, with, like, the state that the Mavs, like, roster is right now, is going to be a trade that the Mavs are going to look for. Like, I mean, what players would you have in mind that they would trade? I don't really think that they would prefer building their team around someone like Josh Giddey, just to give you an example. And I mean, I don't really see them giving up Chet either, because they recently got him, and he's recently, like, proven to be a good asset for the team, not just offensively but defensively as well, as a rim protector, and he could develop to be a very overpowered player given his height and his overall skill as a big man. And not to mention, I don't see them giving up Shai either, given how Shai is ranked higher in MVP rankings than Luka Doncic. So, not entirely sure. If, like, that, again, they do have the pieces to do that trade, but I'm not entirely sure if that trade would happen or is as likely to happen. I mean, if he has the relationship with a lot of the players, then maybe he could. Maybe that could happen. But it seems that he has a better relationship with Nikola Jokic, and given how, again, if he's not happy, I wouldn't be surprised if he just decides to sign with them for however they can. Ooh, he has another comment in the chat. I'm just going to read that real quick. I think it's the draft picks plus Jason Williams. Yeah, Jason Williams is pretty good addition, but again, they also have Deng, who is a development prospect from New Zealand with huge upside. Yeah, Sean, I get at the same time moving from someone like Luka Doncic to Jason Williams, it's like, would they really try to would they really want to trade or to influence a trade to do that? Like, that's a very huge drop from player production, in terms of, like, at least an individual standpoint. I mean, Luol Deng, he does have the defense, so I could see, like, his value, like, on the defensive side. And Jason Williams is a good scorer. I'm not going to say that he's not a good scorer. Like, I remember in several games with OKC, him and Shai have combined for, like, 60 points. So he's a great scorer, not saying that he's not. But going from Luka to someone like him, I don't really watch OKC games that much. They don't really go on the TV as often as but when they do go on, I do watch them. I don't relatively see, like, it's a lot of Shai doing a lot of the isolation and a lot of the shot making and a lot of the shot creating. So, I mean, then again, having Kyrie on the team, would you really want Kyrie to be the face of your team as opposed to Luka as the face of your team? I would think that it would be it would be really, like, for Nuggets fans, it would be sad to see Jamal Murray go. But at the same time, Jamal Murray has shown that he can produce as well as Luka Doncic on the biggest scales, because we saw it in the playoffs where he was dropping triple-doubles along with Nikola Jokic. So he's shown that he could be the driving offensive force that a team needs. and they have Houston's upcoming first-round picks. Yes, that is valuable. I do understand that. But then again, it's like, Sean, again, you're jumping from having it depends on like how the team like feels. Again, like if they feel like they're able to win with the roster that they have with Luka Doncic, then they're not going to give him up. But if they feel like it's time to rebuild, then it could possibly happen. But again, Sean, like it's difficult to say simply because like with these with the players, it's a lot difficult to decide if he's going to bring a lot of value. But yes, he would have to want out if he would want, again, because and that's another story that's really difficult to say because Dallas treats their players right. And if Kyrie doesn't want out, I don't really see Luka wanting out anytime soon. But again, if he would have to want out, then OKC could be a good option. But Luka in an OKC jersey just sounds weird. I don't know why. It just sounds weird. And we have another person in the chat, Be Faster. It's a funny name. Great content. I'm thinking of streaming something similar soon. Dropped you a follow. Really appreciate it. Follows are always very helpful for the show. And it was a great conversation, but we're out of time for that in this segment. Thank you all for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. One more comment from Sean. Why not? Yeah, I think that Kyrie usually gets his teammates to exit town. Could happen. I mean, you could. I'm gonna upload a video on the first segment, so you could look at the comments that I've said for that. I'm going to upload that a little bit later. But again, we're out of time for the show segment, so thank you guys for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show. Leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. Thank you guys once again. And just a reminder, as always, please remember to tip and to donate to get your comments recognized. It puts your comments directly above on my screen, and I'll be alerted for whenever you guys want to comment. The link is streamelements.com/GSMC/sportsnetwork./tip. It is displayed below the ticker on every show segment, as well as in the link in the description. Helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. That is it for this show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't